Reality is not what you see. You believe you are looking at the world right now. You are not. You are looking at your brain's best guess about the world. The neuroscientist Anil Seth, in his 2017 TED Talk, said it as plainly as it can be said. We're all hallucinating all the time. It's just that when we agree about our hallucinations, we call it reality. Read that again. Not some people. Not people on drugs. Not people in the middle of a psychotic break. All of us. Right now. Including you, sitting there, watching this. What you are calling seeing the world is, according to one of the most influential frameworks in cognitive science, a controlled hallucination that your brain is generating from the inside out. 2,600 years ago, a man sitting under a tree in northern India investigated the same territory. He was not holding an fMRI scanner. He was holding his own attention, sharpened over years of practice, and turning it inward on the mind that was doing the seeing. He came to a conclusion that maps onto Seth's with a precision that is almost uncomfortable. He said that what we call perception, sanna, the third of the 5 aggregates that make up a human life, is like a mirage shimmering on the road in the last month of the hot season. Empty, void, without substance. 2 people, 2 instruments, one a laboratory in Sussex, one a forest in the Ganges basin, and they arrived at the same location. But that is not the interesting part of this video, because if you stop the story here, if you say see, science and Buddhism agree that reality is constructed, isn't that fascinating? You have missed what actually matters. You have collected a coincidence and gone home. Here is the question neither of them is asking in the same way. If perception is constructed, if what you see is partly your own brain's invention, then what happens when you see through the construction? Not as a metaphor, not as a philosophy paper. What actually happens in a human being when the mirage is recognized as a mirage? The neuroscientist gives you an fMRI study. The contemplative gives you a practice. Tonight, both answers. The neuroscientist is asking how the mirage is made. The contemplative is asking what to do once you know it's a mirage. Those are 2 different questions arriving at the same location, and the location itself is more interesting than either question alone. This is episode 1 of a new series on this channel called The Meeting Point. 10 episodes, each one an independent standing point. The series follows 2 roads. The road that looks outward at atoms and cells and neural circuits and the age of the universe, and the road that looks inward at attention and craving and the mind that is doing all the looking. The 2 roads keep meeting. They meet at places that neither tradition on its own could quite reach. We are starting where they meet at the surface of your own experience, at the thing you would swear, if pressed, is the most obvious fact in the world, that you can see what is in front of you. You cannot. Not exactly. And what to do about that, once you understand it, is the rest of this hour. Chapter 1. What Neuroscience Found. Start with Anil Seth. Seth is a British neuroscientist at the University of Sussex. He runs the Sackler Centre for Consciousness Science. He is not a fringe figure. He is one of the most cited researchers alive on the question of how the brain generates conscious experience. And the thing he is best known for saying, the thing he said in that 2017 TED Talk that has now been watched more than 16 million times, is this: if hallucination is a kind of uncontrolled perception, then perception, right here and right now, is also a kind of hallucination, but a controlled hallucination in which the brain's predictions are being reined in by sensory information from the world. That is the whole thesis in one sentence. And then he adds the line that catches people. In fact, we're all hallucinating all the time. It's just that when we agree about our hallucinations, we call that reality. For most of us, that lands as a provocation. It sounds like word games. So let us slow down and unpack what he actually means. The naive picture of perception, the one that most of us walk around with, whether or not we've ever thought about it, goes something like this. Light comes off objects in the world. It enters your eye. It hits your retina. Signals travel up the optic nerve. The brain processes those signals. And then, at some point inside your head, an image forms and you see. Perception, on this picture, is bottom up. It starts at the sensory surface, ends in conscious experience, and the flow of information is one way. Seth, along with a growing majority of cognitive scientists, thinks this picture is almost exactly backwards. The idea is old. It goes back at least to Hermann von Helmholtz, the 19th century German physicist and physiologist. In 1867, Helmholtz proposed that perception is a form of unconscious inference. His argument was subtle. He noticed that the sensory information reaching the eye is, considered on its own, wildly ambiguous. A single pattern of light on the retina could have been caused by an infinite number of different scenes in the world. And yet, we do not experience the world as ambiguous. We experience it as definite, as given, as there. Helmholtz asked how that resolution happens, and answered that the brain must be doing something. It must be filling in. It must be inferring from prior experience what the most probable cause of the sensory input is. That was 1867. It was a philosophical hypothesis then. Over the past 40 years, it has become one of the most well-supported theoretical frameworks in the whole of cognitive science. The modern version is called predictive processing, sometimes predictive coding. Carl Friston, at University College London, gave it its most rigorous mathematical form in what is called the free energy principle. Friston's work is famously technical. Papers where every equation has to be earned. But the core intuition can be stated in plain language. Any system that persists, any system that stays alive, stays organized, doesn't dissolve into its environment, must, over time, keep the states of its sensors within a limited range. Your body temperature has to stay near 37 degrees. Your blood sugar has to stay in a narrow window. Your heart rate cannot double for no reason. If your sensory states drift too far from the ranges that a living body can survive in, you die. Friston's insight was that this looks, mathematically, exactly like a system that is minimizing surprise, not psychological surprise, statistical surprise, the probability of finding your sensor readings where they are. Systems that persist are systems that keep their sensory states probable. That is what being alive is, in the language of the mathematics. And since a system cannot directly minimize surprise, it would need to know all its own probabilities in advance, which it can't. It does the next best thing. It generates a model of the world, a predictive model, and it uses that model to guess what its sensors should be reporting next. When the guess matches what actually arrives, no update is needed. When the guess is wrong, that gap, the prediction error, is the only thing that travels upward through the perceptual hierarchy. The brain updates the model, or alternatively, it acts on the world to make the world match the model. You turn your head, you reach out your hand, you take a step forward. That is what action is on this account. Action is prediction being confirmed by movement. Friston has a line that captures this. Staying alive is mathematically equivalent to keeping sensory surprise low. Seth is the one who translated this into language most of us can grasp. He is the communicator. Friston gave us the mathematics. Seth gave us the words. Here is what falls out of all this, and it is the part that startles people the first time they hear it. If perception works this way, if what you consciously see is your brain's ongoing best guess about the causes of the sensory data arriving at your body, then perception is not fundamentally about the world out there. Perception is about predicted models being maintained. The sensory input is not what you experience. The sensory input is what corrects what you experience. What you experience is the model. Seth puts this a certain way in his book. Our perceptual world, he writes, alive with colors and shapes and sounds, is nothing more and nothing less than the brain's best guess about the hidden causes of its colorless, shapeless, and soundless sensory inputs. Think about that phrase. Colorless, shapeless, soundless. The raw signals themselves, voltage changes in your retinal neurons, mechanical vibrations in your inner ear, do not contain color or shape or sound. Color, shape, and sound are constructed by the brain out of predictions on the way to consciousness. What arrives at your senses is not the world. What arrives at your senses is data. The world you experience is the brain's story about that data, or, more starkly, in another passage from the same book, top-down predictions do not merely bias perception, they are what we perceive. If this still sounds abstract, there are demonstrations that make it visceral. Consider a phenomenon called the McGurk effect. You watch a video of a person saying a syllable. The soundtrack has been replaced. The lips are saying one thing. For example, GA. The audio is saying another. For example, bar. When you watch with your eyes open, you hear a third thing that is not present in either the audio or the video. You hear da. If you close your eyes, you hear bar again, correctly, because now only the audio is reaching you. But with your eyes open, the visual information overrides the auditory information at a level you cannot access. You do not hear the sound as it is. You hear the sound the brain has constructed by integrating vision and hearing before consciousness even gets a look at it. You cannot unhear it. You cannot decide to hear it correctly. Prior information, in the form of what your eyes are showing you, has already reshaped what your ears are telling you before you have any say in the matter. Or consider what happened in 2015 when a photograph of a dress went viral on the internet. You may remember it. Some people looked at that photograph and saw a blue dress with black lace. Other people looked at the same photograph and saw a white dress with gold lace. And this was not a joke. People saw what they saw and could not, by any act of will, see the other version. A team led by Rosa Leifesouza at MIT published a proper study on this in the journal Current Biology. Their finding: 57% of people saw blue and black, 30% saw white and gold, 11% saw a third combination, blue and brown, 2% saw something else. And here is the striking part. The people who saw white and gold were disproportionately older and disproportionately female. Their brains had been assuming, without asking them, that the dress was photographed under warm indoor light, and had been subtracting warm tones from the image to reveal what the dress would look like in neutral light. Other brains had been assuming cool outdoor light and had been subtracting cool tones instead. Same photograph, same eyes, same wavelengths of light hitting the same retinas, different assumptions running in the background, different worlds seen. You do not choose your assumptions. They are made for you by prior processing before consciousness arrives. Seth is careful about how he talks about color specifically. Color, he says in an interview, is not out there in the world objectively. It is a construction of the brain that is useful for us. The wavelengths of light are out there. The property we experience as red is not. Red is what the brain does with certain wavelengths, given a context, given a history, given a body. One says the color is painted by the brain, right at the last moment, out of predictions. The other tradition, the one we will get to in a moment, says, watch what your mind does the instant it paints, because that instant is where you get caught. There is one more piece of Seth's picture that matters for what we are doing here. He argues that consciousness is not primarily a system for representing the outside world. Consciousness, on his account, is grounded in the body. It exists to keep a living organism alive. He calls this the beast-machine view. In an authorized excerpt where he lays this out formally, he writes that all of our perceptions and experiences, whether of the self or of the world, are inside-out controlled and controlling hallucinations that are rooted in the flesh and blood predictive machinery that evolved, develops, and operates from moment to moment, always in light of a fundamental biological drive to stay alive. That is the key. A fundamental biological drive to stay alive. Perception is not, on this view, an intellectual project. It is not the brain trying to build an accurate map of reality for its own sake. Perception is what a body does when it is trying to persist. And the predictions that shape your perception are not neutral. They are shaped, top to bottom, by what has kept you and your ancestors alive up to now, which is, incidentally, where this connects to the video we did last time on this channel, on trauma. Trauma, as Van der Kolk and others describe it, is what happens when the body's survival-oriented predictions become miscalibrated. When the machinery designed to keep you safe starts generating threat where there is no threat, or, alternatively, going numb where there ought to be signal. The body is where the constructing process begins. And, as we saw last time, it is also where the practice of coming back begins. This is not a coincidence. It is the same territory, examined from two directions. Now, before we go anywhere near Buddhism, we have to be honest about something, because this is a channel for intellectually serious people, and this audience will notice, correctly, if we oversell. Predictive processing is one of the most influential frameworks in cognitive science today. It is not settled science. There are serious, credentialed scientists and philosophers who think important pieces of it are wrong, or at least incomplete, and we are not going to pretend they don't exist. The most famous of these is the objection raised by the philosopher David Chalmers 30 years ago now, and called the hard problem of consciousness. Chalmers pointed out that even if we had a complete predictive account of perception, every equation solved, every mechanism understood, we would still have said nothing about why there is subjective experience at all. Why is there something it is like to see red? Why does the physical process of predicting wavelengths come along with an inner feel? The mechanism is one thing. The experience is another. And predictive processing, Chalmers argued, addresses the mechanism. It does not touch the experience. Seth, to his considerable credit, does not pretend otherwise. He says he works on what he calls the real problem, explaining the properties of experience, not the hard problem. On the hard problem, he agrees, we may simply have to remain silent, at least for now. There are other critics working from other angles. The philosophers of science Matteo Colombo and Colombo Wright have argued that the free energy principle, in its most ambitious form, is unfalsifiable, that it explains too much, and therefore explains nothing in particular. The cognitive scientist Samuel Gershman has raised related concerns about how much explanatory work the framework can actually do. The physician and philosopher Raymond Tallis has objected to the very word hallucination, arguing that hallucination implies decoupling from reality, whereas normal perception is generally accurate about the survival-relevant features of the world. Calling controlled perception hallucination, Tallis has suggested, is a little like calling controlled swimming drowning, and there is a whole tradition called enactivism, associated with the philosophers and scientists Francisco Varela, Evan Thompson, and Alva Noe, that argues the perception as prediction picture is fundamentally incomplete, because it locates perception inside the brain, when in fact perception is a property of the whole embodied organism dynamically coupled to its environment. On this view, the brain is one part of a larger perceiving system, and treating it as if it did all the work is a category mistake. We will come back to Varela and Thompson in a moment. Their story turns out to be relevant. The point of this segment is not to dismiss predictive processing. It is powerful. It has generated real experimental predictions that have been tested and confirmed. It has given us a language for what happens in psychosis, in dreams, in the effects of psychedelics, in the way expectation shapes pain. It is one of the most productive research programs in the science of mind right now. But it is a program. It is not the final word. It is a leading, powerful account among several serious accounts. And when we ask, in a moment, how it maps onto what the Buddha said, we are not comparing an ancient tradition to settled science. We are comparing two ways of investigating the same territory, both of them provisional, both of them the best that their respective methods have been able to produce so far. With that honest disclaimer in place, with predictive processing understood as an influential, powerful, but contested framework, we can now ask the question that this video exists to ask. What did the Buddha find when he investigated the same thing from the other direction? Chapter 2. What the Buddha found go. Back 26 centuries, we are on the banks of the Ganges River. A man in an ochre robe is sitting under a tree with a small group of monks around him. He has been walking and teaching for something like 45 years by this point. He's old. He knows he is old. And he has, over those decades, developed a way of talking about what a human being is. A way that will turn out to matter for what we are doing tonight. He does not talk about a self in the way we are used to. He does not say you have a body and a soul and a mind, and these are three separate things. What he says is stranger and more precise. He says that what you take to be a person is, when examined carefully, 5 bundles of processes, 5 aggregates: panchakanda, body, feeling tone, perception, formations, consciousness. Not 5 things, 5 processes, each one continuously arising and passing, each one dependent on the others, none of them substantial in the way we usually assume, and in one particular teaching, preserved in what is now called the Phenapindupama Sutta, the discourse on the simile of the lump of foam, SN 22.95, he gave each of the 5 aggregates its own simile. Each simile pointed at a specific quality of the aggregate. Each one was designed to be used, not admired. Meditation instructions essentially, in the form of images. The third aggregate, sanna, perception, is what we are here for. And the simile he gave for perception is the one that matters for this entire video. In Thanissaro Bhikkhu's translation, the passage reads, "Now suppose that in the last month of the hot season a mirage was shimmering, and a man with good eyesight were to see it, observe it, and appropriately examine it. To him, seeing it, observing it, and appropriately examining it, it would appear empty, void, without substance. For what substance would there be in a mirage? In the same way, a monk sees, observes, and appropriately examines any perception. It would appear empty, void, without substance. For what substance would there be in perception? Stay with the image for a moment. The last month of the hot season, in the Ganges plain, means April or May. The temperatures reach 45 degrees Celsius. The air over the hot ground shimmers. If you are walking along a dry road, you see, in the distance, what looks like a pool of water. You know, if you have lived in that climate all your life, that there is no water there. You have seen this 1,000 times, but your eye sees the shimmer, and your mind, for an instant, before you catch it, sees water. That is what perception is like, the Buddha is saying. It is the shimmer. It is what appears before the mind catches it and knows what it actually is. And the phrase that carries the weight is this one: empty, void, without substance. The Pali is ritaka, tuchaka, asaraka, empty of what it seems to contain, void of solidity, lacking the very thing that would make it what you took it to be. That is the finding. Now, and this is important, because we have to be careful here. The Buddha is not saying that nothing is happening. He is not saying that the world does not exist. He is not saying that perception is a delusion in the sense of an error to be corrected. The mirage is not nothing. There is refracted light on hot air. Something is genuinely there at the sensory level. But the mirage is also not what you took it to be. There is no water. And the waterness, the thing that your mind constructed, the thing you would have run toward if you were thirsty and unwary, that waterness is empty. It has no substance. It cannot be found no matter how carefully you look. Bhikkhu Bodhi, in his commentary on this sutta, is emphatic on this point. And this is a commentarial reading, not the sutta itself. So I am labeling it clearly as Bodhi's own interpretive gloss. Bodhi writes that this teaching is not intended to suggest an illusionist view of the world. The view that nothing exists, that all is dream, that reality is a projection. That is not the Buddhist claim. The Buddhist claim, on Bodhi's reading, is that our conceptions of the world and of ourselves are largely distorted by the process of cognition. False conceptions arise from a base that objectively exists. Something is out there. Something is causing the shimmer. But what your mind does with what is causing the shimmer, that is where the distortion enters. Not at the level of existence. At the level of cognition, that distinction is worth pausing on. Because a certain kind of pop Buddhism, especially in the West, has treated the mirage simile as if it proved that reality is an illusion in the strong sense. That nothing is real, that the world is a hologram, that we should simply stop taking anything seriously. That is not what the sutta says. That is not what Bodhi says the sutta says. And I should mention here that another translator, the late Bhikkhu Nyanananda, actually pushed back on Bodhi's gloss, accusing him of being bound by the commentarial tradition and insisting on a more radical reading. This is a real intra-Buddhist dispute among careful scholars. We do not need to resolve it tonight. We are noting it because a channel that pretends there is only one Buddhist reading of anything is lying to you. What the sutta says, what both readings agree on, is that perception is empty of the substance we impute to it. The shimmer is real, the water is not. Now, if you compare that with where chapter 1 ended, with Anil Seth saying that our perceptual world, alive with colors and shapes and sounds, is nothing more and nothing less than the brain's best guess about the hidden causes of its colorless, shapeless, and soundless sensory inputs. You may notice something. Seth is talking about a construction that appears solid, but is, at its base, a model. The Buddha is talking about a perception that appears substantial, but is, at its base, without substance. Two different vocabularies, two different methods, one shape. I am not saying the Buddha predicted predictive processing. That formulation is precisely what this channel refuses to make. It is intellectually cheap, historically false, and it does damage to both traditions by treating one as the ancient anticipation of the other. That is not what happened. What happened is that two serious, disciplined investigations of the same territory, perception, arrived at findings that map onto each other because the territory itself has certain features and any careful investigator will eventually notice them. The neuroscientist asks how the mirage is made. The contemplative asks what to do once you know it's a mirage. Both questions are legitimate. Both are being asked at the same location. Let us go deeper into what the Buddha said perception actually is, because the mirage simile is only the first move. In another discourse, the Mahavadala Sutta, MN 43, the elder monk Mahakotita and the elder monk Sariputta, who is the Buddha's chief disciple, have a long dialogue about the fine-grained structure of experience. At one point, Mahakotita asks Sariputta what perception actually consists of, and Sariputta gives him a definition that is startling in its specificity. In Thanisaro's translation, Sariputta says, it perceives. Thus, friend, it is said to be perception. And what does it perceive? It perceives blue. It perceives yellow. It perceives red. It perceives white. It perceives. Thus, it is said to be perception. Notice what has just happened. Perception, on this account, is not the receiving of raw sensory data. Perception is categorization. Perception is the act of labeling. Perception is what happens when the mind takes what is arriving and puts it into a bucket, blue, yellow, red, white, and names it as such. And in the same dialogue, Sariputta distinguishes perception from two neighboring processes. Feeling, Vedana, the second aggregate, is not categorization. Feeling is hedonic tone. Pleasure, pain, or neither. That is all feeling is, on this view. It is not emotion in the modern sense. It is the raw, positive, or negative, or neutral signal that arises with every contact between a sense organ and its object. And consciousness, vijnana, the fifth aggregate, is bare cognizing, the knowing that something is present at all. And then Sariputta says something that most of us miss on the first reading. He says that these three, feeling, perception, and consciousness, are conjoined, not disjoined. What one feels, one perceives. What one perceives, one cognizes. They come together as one bundled event, so tightly that you cannot pull them apart by ordinary attention. You would have to look very, very carefully to see them as three, which is precisely what Buddhist meditation practice is designed to train. So here is the picture. There is contact. Light hits an eye, sound hits an ear. That contact generates a hedonic tone, pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, faster than you can notice. That hedonic tone is accompanied by a perception, a labeling, a categorizing. This is blue, this is a face, this is my mother, this is a threat. And the labeling is accompanied by bare consciousness, the fact that something is being cognized at all. Three simultaneous processes. One apparent event, all of it happening at a speed that ordinary attention cannot slow down. The parallel to what we heard from Seth is now, I hope, becoming visible without me having to spell it out. But let me spell it out anyway, because this is where the video is going. Seth says, color is not out there in the world. Color is a construction of the brain that is useful for us. The wavelengths are out there. red is not. The Buddha, through Sariputta, is saying, what perception does is label. It perceives blue, it perceives yellow, it perceives red, it perceives white. The labeling is what perception is. The label is not the thing. One says the color is painted by the brain, right at the last moment, out of predictions. The other says, watch what your mind does the instant it paints. Because that instant is where you get caught. This is where we get to the third teaching, which is the one that connects perception to suffering. Because so far we have been describing perception in a neutral way. Perception constructs, perception labels, perception is empty of substance. Fine, interesting. But the reason the Buddha cared about any of this is because he thought it was directly connected to dukkha, to the unsatisfactoriness at the core of ordinary experience. He was not doing philosophy of mind for its own sake. He was doing philosophy of mind because he thought getting this right was the difference between freedom and bondage. The teaching that links perception to suffering is in the Madhubindika Sutta, MN 18. The title of the discourse means the ball of honey, because at the end, the Buddha compares his own teaching to a delicious lump of honey that his monks can turn over and taste from every side. And what he lays out in that discourse is a chain, a cascade, that starts with contact and ends, if it isn't interrupted, with a mind at war with itself. The chain, in Thanisaro's translation, runs like this. What one feels, one perceives. What one perceives, one thinks about. What one thinks about, one papancheeses. Based on what a person papancheeses, the perceptions and categories of papanca assail him. The Pali word at the end there is papanca. It is one of the most contested translation choices in Buddhist studies. Thanisaro renders it objectification, and he defends this choice by pointing out that the categories papanca generates all begin with the objectifying thought, I am the thinker. Bhikkhu Bodhi, working from a different scholarly angle, renders it mental proliferation, the cascade of associated concepts and elaborations that spin out from a single perception, until the original perception is buried under an entire web of interpretation. Bhikkhu Nyanananda, in a well-known monograph, used conceptual proliferation. No translator is fully satisfied. There is no early text that clearly defines the term. What all the translations capture is that perception, when left unexamined, generates a cascade, a spinning out of thought that compounds and compounds until you are no longer perceiving what is in front of you at all. You are perceiving what your mind has done with what was in front of you several elaborations ago. Whichever translation you prefer, the structure is the same. Contact happens, feeling arises, perception labels, thinking begins, and then thinking runs away, and the categories it generates loop back and shape what you perceive next, and the whole system starts to accelerate, and eventually, this is the punchline of the discourse, you are assailed, you are harassed, you are tormented by the very categories your own mind has produced. What you feel, you label. What you label, you think about. What you think about troubles you. This is where the practical difference between the two traditions we are following becomes visible. Because Seth, working within the frame of Western neuroscience, is asking how the labeling happens. What neural circuits generate the labels? What mathematical principles govern their updating? What happens in the brain when the labels go wrong? Those are the questions science can answer. The Buddha, working within the frame of contemplative investigation, is asking what to do about the labeling. Where in the chain can attention be inserted such that the runaway does not happen? Where is the gap? The answer he gives, and the answer that all the mainstream Buddhist meditation traditions carry forward from him is that the gap is right at the point of Vedana, right at the raw hedonic tone, before the labeling has fully hardened into this is X, therefore Y, therefore I must Z. This is the meaning of the practice called Vedananupassana, attending to feeling as feeling before it becomes something else. Where the scientist sees prediction error being computed by the visual cortex, the meditator is learning to sit in the half second before the label solidifies. Same location, different actions taken at that location. There is one more piece of the Buddhist analysis that we need before we can bring the two traditions together in the next chapter. Because so far, we have been describing perception as if it were neutral, as if the mind just labels whatever comes along. And the trouble starts only later, in the thinking. But the Buddha was more specific than that. He argued that perception itself is systematically distorted in specific ways that we can name. The teaching is in the Vipallasa Sutta, AN 4.49. Vipallasa means inversion, a turning upside down. And the Buddha lists 4 of them. 4 ways in which ordinary perception is inverted with respect to how things actually are. The 4 inversions of perception are these: taking the impermanent as permanent, taking what is unsatisfactory as satisfactory, taking dukkha as sukha, taking what has no self as having a self, and taking what is unattractive, asubha, sometimes translated as foul or impure, though the word carries a specific technical meaning about the body, as attractive. 4 inversions, 4 ways in which the labeling function of perception, unless carefully trained, is not neutral. It is biased. It is systematically biased by avijja, by ignorance, by the accumulated formations of prior experience, by what the Buddhist tradition calls sankhara, the 4th aggregate, which is essentially the residue of all your previous experiences and choices, shaping what you notice and what you overlook right now. Your perception is distorted by everything you have ever experienced and assumed. That is what the tradition is saying. Now stop and hold that next to Seth. Seth says, what you experience as the world is the brain's best guess, and that best guess is shaped, top to bottom, by prior experience and by the biological drive to stay alive. The Buddha says, what you experience as the world is what perception labels, and that labeling is shaped, top to bottom, by accumulated formations and by the ignorance that has been running the whole system since before you were born. 2 vocabularies, 2 methods, both saying that perception is not a window, both saying that the shape of what you see is determined by what you have accumulated, both saying that the accumulation itself is invisible to ordinary attention. And this brings us to the point where the 2 traditions have to be brought into the same room and asked what they can do for each other, because seeing that perception is constructed is not, by itself, liberating. Millions of people have now read Seth's book, have heard the phrase controlled hallucination, and have gone back to their lives essentially unchanged. Knowing the mirage is a mirage, in the abstract, does not stop you from reaching for the water. Something more has to happen. The Buddha thought he knew what that something was. And the modern scientific tradition, at its best, has been circling the same insight from the outside. That is where we go next. Chapter 3. 2 paths from the same location. Both traditions arrive at the same clearing. Perception is a construction. What you experience as the world is not the world. It is a model, a set of labels, a rendering. Both Seth and the Buddha are standing at that clearing. Both are looking at the same finding. And then, at that clearing, they turn in different directions and walk different paths. That difference is where this video actually pays off. So let us take each of the 2 paths in turn seriously, on its own terms, and then see what each one illuminates in the other. Start with the neuroscientist's path. Seth is often asked in interviews and at the end of his talks whether his own picture of perception unsettles him, whether the thought that one's own experience is a controlled hallucination generates existential vertigo. He has asked variants of this question often enough that he has developed a considered answer. His answer is roughly this: no, it does not unsettle him. It does the opposite. In his book, he puts it this way, approximately, so I am going to paraphrase, rather than pretend to a verbatim quote here. He says that once you understand that perception is a construction, you take yourself less for granted. The self becomes less impressive as a permanent thing, and more impressive as a process. Your experience of the world stops being the thing you assume is just there, and becomes something wondrous, a rolling, moment-to-moment construction that your body is generating for the purpose of staying alive. He uses the word awe. He talks about curiosity. He explicitly contrasts this with terror. The move he is making is worth naming. He is saying the discovery that perception is constructed does not diminish experience. It re-enchants it. It makes the ordinary miraculous. What used to look like a plain view out of a plain window turns out to be the ongoing achievement of a living body. And this, he suggests, is grounds for gratitude, not for anxiety. That is the neuroscientist's practical response. Awe, wonder, curiosity, and it is a real response. It is not nothing. Many people, having read Seth or watched his TED Talk, do report a shift in how they hold their own experience. The dress goes viral, and a few million people, briefly, glimpse the fact that their own perception is not the last word. That is a genuine cultural event. But, and this is where the Buddhist path opens up as something distinct, Seth's response is essentially cognitive. It is a change of frame. You understand that perception is a construction, and you use that understanding to hold your experience differently. You now know something that you did not know before. The knowledge, if it stays with you, colors your relationship to your own seeing. That is one kind of response to the discovery, and it is real. The other kind of response, the one the Buddhist tradition offers, is not primarily cognitive. It is a training of attention. And this is where the two paths become genuinely different, because here is the honest problem with Seth's answer, and I say this with respect for what he is doing. Cognitive understanding, unaccompanied by trained attention, tends to be thin. Millions of people have now heard the phrase controlled hallucination. They have watched the TED Talk. They have said out loud, that's fascinating. And then, an hour later, they were angry at someone in traffic. They were anxious about their mortgage. They were reaching for a drink. Their perception of the world snapped back into feeling just there, just true, just how it obviously is. And the cognitive knowledge that it was constructed made no visible difference to how they were living inside that construction. This is not Seth's fault. Cognitive knowledge is a thin instrument for changing lived experience. It is the wrong tool for the job. Reading about the mirage does not stop you reaching for the water when you are thirsty and unwary. The Buddhist tradition, at its most rigorous, is a response to exactly this problem. And its response is, you cannot think your way out of a constructed perception. You have to train attention to a fineness at which the constructing process itself becomes visible while it is happening. And once it becomes visible while it is happening, its grip loosens on its own, not because you convince yourself of anything, because you are actually seeing what the mind is doing at the resolution at which it is doing it. The technical name for this training is vipassana, usually translated as insight. though the literal meaning is closer to seeing clearly or seeing through. And the specific practices that constitute vipassana in the early Buddhist tradition are laid out most systematically in what is called the Satipatthana Sutta, the discourse on the foundations of mindfulness, MN 10. It lists 4 foundations: attention to the body, kayanupassana; attention to feeling, vedananupassana; attention to the mind, cittanupassana; attention to mental objects, dhammanupassana. The first 2 are the ones that connect directly to what we have been talking about all night. Kayanupassana is the practice of turning attention, patiently and repeatedly, to the raw signal of the body. Breath moving through the nostrils, weight settling into a cushion, temperature at the surface of the skin, before the mind labels what any of it means. The point is not to relax, though relaxation may occur. The point is not to feel good, though that may also occur. The point is to notice, more and more finely, the specific moment at which the raw signal becomes a label, to catch the labeling in the act, to see sanna doing its work. And vedananupassana is the practice of attending with the same patience and the same repetition to the hedonic tone that arises with every contact, that instantaneous, pre-labeled, positive or negative or neutral quality that colors every moment before you have a chance to think about it. This is the gap the Buddha pointed at in the papanca chain. If you can rest attention in Vedana itself, without immediately hardening it into perception and thought, the cascade does not run, not because you have suppressed it, because the fuel that would drive it has not been added. Now compare that with what Seth is doing. Seth is telling you in an accessible and beautiful way that perception is constructed. He is giving you the cognitive scaffolding, the concept of controlled hallucination, the language of predictive processing, the McGurk effect, the dress. What he is doing is offering you the discovery in a form the modern educated mind can accept. The Buddha is telling you how to see perception being constructed, not as a fact you know, as a process you catch in your own mind, in real time, over the course of a life of practice. Both are responses to the same finding, but they are responses of different kinds. One is a change in what you know. The other is a change in what you can see. And what you can see, if the tradition is right, is the thing that actually changes how you live. The scientist offers you the map. The Buddhist path offers you the practice of walking at the resolution of your own body until the map becomes visible under your feet as territory. And walked far enough, the tradition claims, the very way you inhabit perception starts to change. Not because you have adopted a new belief about it, but because you have stopped mistaking the shimmer for water at the level where the mistake was being made. That is the divergence. But there is one more thing to say in this chapter, because if we left it at that, we would have made the two traditions sound as if they had never spoken, and that would be historically false. There is one place in the modern history of these ideas where the scientific investigation of perception and the Buddhist investigation of perception have explicitly and formally met. Not in a metaphor, not in a comparative essay, but in an actual working partnership between real scientists and real Buddhist practitioners. It happened in 1991, and it has been quietly shaping the conversation ever since. The moment I am pointing at is the publication of a book called The Embodied Mind by 3 authors: Francisco Varela, a Chilean neuroscientist and philosopher of cognition; Evan Thompson, a philosopher who has spent his career at the boundary of cognitive science and philosophy of mind; and Eleanor Roche, a cognitive psychologist at Berkeley, who did some of the founding work on how the human mind forms categories. All 3 had serious Buddhist practice backgrounds. Varela had spent years in Vajrayana practice with Tibetan teachers, and the group as a whole drew heavily on Theravada mindfulness traditions as well. Their book proposed that the mainstream cognitive science of the day, the brain as a symbol processing computer picture, was missing something essential about what cognition actually is. What they proposed instead came to be called enactivism. The core claim, briefly, is that cognition is not a process that happens inside the brain, working on representations of an external world. Cognition is enacted, brought forth, through the ongoing dynamic coupling of a living, embodied organism with the environment it inhabits. Mind is not in the head. Mind is what a body in a world does. If that sounds abstract, notice what it entails. On the enactivist view, you cannot understand perception by studying the brain in isolation, because perception is not something the brain does by itself. Perception is something a whole body, in continuous action, in a specific environment performs, and the performing is what generates whatever cognition looks like from the inside. Now, and this is where the historical convergence gets interesting, enactivism has become one of the leading scientific alternatives to the pure predictive processing account. Some of the sharpest critiques of Seth-style internalism come from Thompson and his students. This is a live debate in the philosophy of cognitive science right now. And the point I want you to notice is this: the scientific approach that most seriously challenges the picture we spent Chapter 1 laying out was founded as an intellectual project in a specific book in 1991 by scientists who had done serious Buddhist meditation practice. Their contact with the contemplative tradition was not incidental to their science. It shaped what they were able to see. That is not the same claim as the Buddha predicted enactivism. It is a much smaller and much more defensible claim. It is two traditions of investigating perception, which have been running in parallel for most of history, have actually met once in a documented and public way, and the meeting produced a whole new way of doing cognitive science. The dialogue has continued since. There are annual conferences, there are joint research programs, there are entire graduate programs. The Mind and Life Institute is the most famous, organized around exactly this exchange. We are not the first people to notice that these two traditions are asking about the same territory. Careful researchers on both sides have been noticing it for decades and doing something serious with the noticing. What we are doing tonight, in a video for a general audience, is downstream of that work. And now we come to the payoff of this whole chapter. The two traditions we have been tracking do not oppose each other. They also do not merge into one. What they do, at their best, is illuminate each other. Predictive processing gives Buddhist practitioners a modern vocabulary for what the tradition has been describing all along. A way of talking about sanna as controlled hallucination, about papanca as runaway prediction, about vedana as the raw prediction error that has not yet been categorized. It offers a mechanism. It makes the ancient description legible to a scientific age, and Buddhist practice gives cognitive science something it does not, on its own methods, have access to: a rigorous, trained first-person investigation of what perception is like from the inside, at timescales and resolutions that third-person measurement can't reach. When Varela and Thompson made room for that first-person data in their science, they broke open a set of problems that could not have been touched from the outside alone. Neither tradition is complete without the other. Neither tradition should be reduced to the other. But at the location where they meet, more is visible than either of them can see on its own. That is what this series exists to explore. And that is what we came here tonight to see. Close. Come back to where we started. Anil Seth, in his 2017 TED Talk, said this: "We're all hallucinating all the time. When we agree about our hallucinations, we call it reality. And in the sutta, we open chapter 2 with the Phenapindapama, SN 22.95. The Buddha closes his teaching with a verse. In Thanissaro Bhikkhu's translation, it goes like this: form is like a glob of foam, feeling, a bubble, perception, a mirage, fabrications, a banana tree, consciousness, a magic trick. This has been taught by the kinsman of the sun. Perception, a mirage. Both of them are pointing at the same shimmer on the road ahead." Seth says, "This is how the shimmer is made." The Buddha says, "The shimmer does not contain what you think it does. And here is what to do about that." The neuroscientist gives you an fMRI study. The contemplative gives you a practice. Different offerings. Neither one, on its own, is enough. Together, they describe something a serious person can actually work with. If you take one thing from this hour, take this. What you experience as the world, just there is not the world just there. It is a rendering that your body is generating for the purpose of staying alive, shaped by everything you have ever experienced, colored by whatever your particular history has taught you to see as safe or dangerous, familiar or strange, worth wanting or worth avoiding. That rendering is not wrong, exactly, but it is not just how things are, and the distance between how it feels and what it is. That distance is where a great deal of ordinary suffering lives. You do not have to become a monk to notice this. You do not have to become a neuroscientist either. You have to sit still once in a while, for long enough that the rendering slows down, and you can see, for a moment, that it is being generated. Not read about being generated, not think about being generated. See being generated, in yourself, in the ordinary act of looking at whatever is in front of you. That is where both traditions in the end point. Not to a doctrine, not to a discovery, to an act of attention. Try it, briefly, before this video ends. Wherever you are watching this, a living room, a bedroom, wherever your remote is sitting on the arm of a chair, look at something in front of you, something ordinary, the lamp, the screen, your own hand, and notice for one breath that what you are seeing is not the thing itself. What you are seeing is the ongoing achievement of a living body right now doing the work of rendering. That noticing is a beginning. Both traditions think so. This has been the first episode of The Meeting Point, a 10-episode series on this channel, following the places where scientific investigation of the world and Buddhist investigation of the mind arrive at the same location. Each episode stands on its own. You do not need to watch them in order. More will be released in this series as we go. 2 roads, 1 meeting point at a time. Thank you for spending this hour with me. See you at the next one.